3 months ago to be the facilitator for Weber CTC.
So one of the things that we've done a data analysis. So every one of our kids at school does they participate in a SHARP study, which gives us data as to whether they're using e-cigs, whether they're experiencing bullying, whether they are smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, and at what ages those things are happening. So we were able to take that data with our data work group. So we've got multiple groups. We've got 6 of them? Yeah, 6 work groups. And our data work group was able to analyze this data and say, okay, these are our problem areas. 8th grade and 10th grade, we have a spike in e-cig use. We have a spike in bullying in 8th grade and a spike in bullying in 6th grade. We have a spike in alcohol consumption between 9th and 10th grade. Why is that? Is it because they're transferring schools? They're going to the high school, and are they exposed to more things? So what we look at is, okay, what are these risks? And then what protective factors does our community have? This is a strong family community. How do we bring those families together so that we can educate parents, we can educate students, we can educate siblings so that they have the tools to make better decisions, to either avoid those high-risk situations or to help someone get out of one of those high-risk situations when they're presented with them. So I believe that prevention is truly where we need to put a little bit more effort, because I will tell you that in the treatment side of it, we had to triple the size of our building in order to accommodate the level of use of people accessing mental health services. And there are a lot of these issues. They are kids with tickets. They are families who are blended families, and we've got kids who are suicidal because they don't know how they fit in, or the LGBTQ community is a growing population, and kids don't know how to understand that or express themselves. And it's something that we have to embrace and say, yes, this is a problem everywhere, and we can do something about it. And I believe that prevention is where we're going to be able to do it. Why we're here is we have one of our work groups is a key leader work group, which we ask all of the cities, and so that includes mayors, city council members, chief of police, superintendents, business leaders in our community to participate, because you are leaders in our community. People listen to you. People go to you for advice. People go to you for help. And we use the key leaders as part of our decision-making process. So there's a key leader board which meets quarterly. That then has representation on our board where we make decisions and what kind of prevention programs are we going to put into place? What are we going to do? For example, we spent $3,200 at Orion when they did the New Hope dinner. And we were able to do $3,200 worth of food and pass out information about, from Parents Empowered, about alcohol use and saying no, and how all of those things, educating parents about alcohol use. One of the next projects that we have going on is Parents Empowered is sponsoring an event at Weber High where we're going to hang banners which has information, and it's fun stuff. It's things kids will look at and kind of remember the catchy phrases and whatnot. And we'll hang banners at the gym, in the gym at Weber, and we'll have at the entrance table, we'll have another table with a whole bunch of information about alcohol use and how to teach your kids to make those good choices and all those things that go into that. And so that'll be something that will get information out to the community that we're trying to target. We're just starting with a lot of things, and we're finding that we could really use a little bit more involvement from the cities, and I think part of it is educating you as to what we do, and that we need somebody. We need somebody from every city, so you have a voice, and we can hear what your constituents are saying to you about what they're feeling and what they're seeing in their communities, and help us make those decisions appropriately. Have I missed anything?
So previously, last month we had a key leader meeting, quarterly meeting, and there was only 2 that came to the meeting. It was Leonard Call and Max Jackson. Before I had come in, Lauren Anderson had already established the key leaders from the different cities. Brett Chuggett, were you on that? Brett Taylor was, but he got sent,
I've been the one.
You were.
I was sick that night. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we wanted to come back in just to kind of review you guys, not review, letting you know that we're still in the process. We're still here. We still want to be the Weber CTC community, and we want your support, helping us with, getting the CTC on board, getting it going stronger than what, that we're doing right now. A lot of that has to do with funding as well. Once we start doing all these activities with the Weber CTC to help the youth, to give them the skills and the resources they need for substance use, suicide, and, things like that, there's going to be a lot more activities, a lot more commitment for the key leaders to know that this is something that's going to help our youth, that kind of help the community. And that comes along with having a coordinator. I am just a facilitator. I'm filling in for a coordinator to get this process started, which is, it's a lot of work, details, getting all the members together, getting all the work groups together, making sure that they're doing their job. So we're asking, like, each city if they would not donate or have some funding to help hire a coordinator, and which is $5,000, but that's between all the cities. If they can all come in with that, and that we can get a coordinator to help out with the process.
So right now we're operating strictly off of grant money, so no contributions from any of the cities. I think maybe one city has contributed, but this is something that we have to plan for, and it has to be a perpetual. We're continually writing grants. We're continually working with the cities on raising money for these types of activities that bring community awareness. Have any of you seen the article that was in the Best Yet back in August about the Weber CTC? It kind of sums it up. I'm like seeing blank. I'm gonna.
What was it in?
So that's the article that Carla Chug had written for the Weber CTC, which kind of sums up who we are and what we do. And I believe that, do you have, I want to grab one. Okay. And then these are the quarterly updates that we would be sending to you, so you know exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're spending money on, who we're affecting. And hopefully you're contributing in the process to make those decisions along the way as well. Questions?
So do you work, oh, so go ahead, Mayor, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so do you work in tandem with other, I know, for example, Matt Lund's mom is on the board for a group that works with suicide prevention. What's the name of that, Matt?
Probably know as much as I do.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I
so,
know she's very
and just so you know, my wife was on a board at one time for a suicide prevention coalition that I know North Ogden, Pleasant View, and Harrisville had a couple years ago, and then I don't know if it kind of, and I don't know if it was affiliated with you guys or if it just that kind of fell apart. So maybe that's the same.
I don't know.
So we collaborate with other entities.
So we'll pull in like New Hope, and we'll work with New Hope on suicide prevention. We'll work with Weber Human Services on education, different educational programs. In fact, I think we run some now at Weber High. And
Learning to Breathe program.
Yeah, Learning to Breathe, mindfulness, giving kids tools to be able to deal with daily lives, which affects the outcomes of these numbers that we're looking at.
So today you're here more to just present information.
Present information and ask for support.
So when you say support, what are you?
One of you to be at all of our meetings, quarterly meetings, and then to represent on the board, because we really do need your input.
It would be more on the key leader board, if we can have a key leader representative from each city, when we have a quarterly meetings, and then that way when we have activities or we do it in a project or something, that we can come present it to you, and you guys would know that what we're doing in the community and vote on if you feel that's a good for the community.
I know Phil sounded like he was involved with that.
Yeah, I was planning to be at the meeting on the 11th, but unfortunately caught that nasty bug that's been going around.
Would you like still be on the?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you want to keep you.
This has been an issue within my family, so.
Okay.
And I would volunteer. I'm not certainly seeking that kind of a experience, but I'm on the board of trustees for Family Promise of Ogden.
Okay.
And I think that's I think even though our direction is a little bit different, assisting the homeless, it kind of complements what you're doing.
It's all under a big umbrella.
So if you ever needed help in some way, I think Phil is a really great representative there, but I'd be happy to help wherever I could help.
That would be fabulous.
So are you looking at maybe for a contribution from the city, if that were possible?
Yes, for the coordinator. To help fund the coordinator that the CTC would need to help get everything rolling, and just to be the organizer, to organize all the work groups, to organize all the events, to do the minutes, to do the agendas, to do and everything that needs to be involved within.
Have you gotten other cities that are making contributions to?
So Harrisville City has committed. I talked with Michelle Tate, and one of the city council members there will be participating, and obviously Max Jackson was attending the meetings. We will be talking with Leonard Call and his city council in November and going over the details. One of the challenges we ran into was with elections last November. There was so much changeover in all of the cities that the information that we had presented previously were people who were leaving. And so now it's kind of a rebuilding and engaging and asking for the money again.
How much are you asking for?
So it's 5,000 total between all the cities.
5,000 between
All us,
So like-
Harrisville.
Pleasant View,
Yeah, so like
Harrisville,
1,000 each or
Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a gal up in the valley. I can't think of her first name, but Warburton.
Laura.
Hannah's mom.
Laura.
Laura.
Hannah's mom, yeah.
Yeah. She has been asked to, in fact, we sat with her at the Orion event. So she is engaged because obviously she's, touched by
Right.
sad tragedy.
And she has a 501c3, as I recall, that assists in
Hannah's
the Hannah's.
Hannah's Hope,
Hannah's Hope?
Hannah's Hope it is, yeah. Excuse me.
that's what we're trying to prevent from happening. I mean, that was such a tragic situation, and we don't want everybody to have that experience. And the more I talk to people, everybody is facing those situations, and it's hard.
Just out of curiosity, I'm probably prolonging this maybe more than I should. I apologize.
You're
But
fine.
what kind of response do you get from the schools? Because obviously, some of your best presentation is going to be at assemblies, for example. Are the schools pretty cooperative in saying, yeah, we can make room for another assembly that presents this kind of
They've been
information?
very supportive. We're trying to find ways to. We find that backdoor information sometimes gets to kids a little better than putting everybody in a gym and here's the information, which is a traditional way of looking at it. And sometimes we're the target audience that we're looking at isn't that 10% who's causing all the issues. It's that 90% that we think is okay that really isn't paying attention. In
So
those
you're
assemblies.
preaching to the choir when you're talking to
Correct.
the assemblies?
Correct. So it's more like presence and being involved. Like, one of the things that we've talked about doing is getting involved in the Cherry Days Parade and having, that presence there. It's the presence in the talking about alcohol, talking about suicide, being unafraid to have those discussions in your family home, whether it be because you want to educate your children or because some of them, you're noticing a behavioral change. How do you see those things? I can tell you how many parents have come in and said, I had no idea my kid was going to kill themselves. No idea. And that's what we want to teach people. So it's not just the kids, it's educating our whole community.
And the coalition also has a youth group. We just don't have any youth yet getting involed, but we're hoping we saw some
We
really
like those
good
kids.
youth over here. So we're hoping like when we get the youth involved, then we can, we can, kind of have them as a resource to know what's going on in the community too, and kind of what resources they would need. So.
And we'll look at like religious organizations, businesses, themselves, because they do have a voice and they want to be heard and they want to participate. Every aspect of our community is what we're looking at engaging, and we start from the top and work down.
Mayor, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry, this
I
is
have a
just my
question?
curiosity.
Yeah.
But there was an app that was available to students.
The Safe Utah app.
Yeah, how successful was that as far as,
It's
were
very-
there metrics that were used to evaluate?
So the University of Utah is, the University of Utah Psychiatric Unit is the organization that put that together. And the statistics that they actually came back with was that because kids like to text, because they don't want to pick up the phone and call, they had actually specific numbers of kids that they had actually spoken with and were able to guide them towards more resources. And I think that Hope Squads that are in the schools now have that information, and they're kind of passing that in the schools and making sure kids know about that. So that is something that is a great tool. It's one tool, but it's a great tool.
Do you know if they have metrics to evaluate how well that app was received by?
Sure they do.
I'm sure that they do, because I think it was done as a research project for the University of Utah.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we could find that information. I just
That would
wasn't
be
prepared
very
for that one
interesting.
today.
I'm kind of a stats guy, so that would be very
Okay.
interesting.
Okay.
Mayor, we support financially the YCC every year. They come to us for a donation every year, and we gladly support them because of the great work that they do. I know our tax revenues have come in above projection so far this year, that we're pretty far ahead. I would propose that we as a council, John, I don't know how we need, that we can do this tonight,
Oh, you take it. Thanks.
but
Yeah.
I would propose that we donate $1,500 to this organization for the work that they're doing to try to help with that coordinator.
So we have planned to do a budget hearing at the end of November.
Okay?
And so that's the time it would be officially approved, but I think that if the council wanted to do some,
We give it a tacit thumbs up, or if we could do something sooner? Excuse
see
me.
what the,
I figured as well-to-do as you are, you could probably just pocket that one.
What's that?
As well-to-do as you are, I thought maybe you could just pocket that
You're
one.
the guy that buys a new truck every year.
so it
Those
doesn't,
donations
If anybody's
also.
going to win the lotto,
so, the agenda doesn't say action, but that doesn't, if you did a kind of that idea that you'd like to see that brought back on the agenda for the budget meeting, I'll make sure Evan has that as part of the budget.
I'd like to see it brought back. I don't know how the rest of the council feels,
I think
but
that's well worth
$1,500.
a contribution
Okay.
and we'll have our
Pocket
next
change.
key leader meeting in
for
January.
good cause.
for a good cause.
No, isn't it? Okay.
Our key leader meeting will be in January,
Right.
our next
That'll
one.
be our next one. I'll try not to be sick that time.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
thank you for the presentation. This is the first time I've been exposed to it, and I appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you.
It's very needful.
Thank you.
Yvette, do you have a contact number? I know
do.
that Diane's is on here.
Mine's not on there on purpose.
Well, I guess it's probably it's not your cell phone, but where can you be reached?
I'm at Aloha Behavioral, which is.
Okay. You're out on Harrisville Road.
Yes.
I always was curious how you came up with
So I
Aloha.
was born and raised in Honolulu.
No!
I was born and raised in Honolulu. My husband, actually, who is Hawaiian, was born and raised on 28th and Pingree and got into social work. And so when we created the company back in 2004, he sat, I swear to God, he sat up all night long thinking of a name. And he came up with Aloha Behavioral Consultants because it also matches his treatment concept of an ABC model. And so that's where Aloha Behavioral came. And he
So-
did his master's work at the University of Hawaii.
You feel like Ohana when you're at Aloha Counseling.
We try real hard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I think that's the most I've ever heard Blake speak in a long time.
I'd like to listen more than I do comment, but that's some pretty very legitimate subjects to discuss.
Thank you.
Item 5 on our discussion or action to consider special exception to allow extended length for a cul-de-sac in the proposed Mackley subdivision located at approximately 775 East, 1750 North. Our presenter will be Brandon Bell, our associate planner.
Mayor, before Brendan presents, I would like to excuse myself from this discussion because there's a huge conflict of interest, and I don't think I should be a part of this discussion or choose to. Stoker Brothers are building the house for Lunds. So I'm going to exit stage right.
Just don't go home.
I won't. But I won't be here.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Back some details on this application, there's an associated subdivision that goes along with this special exception request, in which the special exception request is made for. The project area is 2.93 acres. Lynn, could you pull up, or whoever's operating the computer, okay, you've got it. This is the subdivision plat. That's the proposed subdivision plat that's received. It's received preliminary approval, but that approval is contingent or hanging on the question of whether the special exception should or is approved by the city council. A couple of related details before I get into the background on this and the type of decision that it is. I was asked to just make a couple comments about a related application for annexation, which is a requirement for the subdivision. There's some noticing fees that need to be paid by that for that in order for the annexation to continue. And then there's also a related item related to a request by, or the applicants expressed a desire to use some city property that's adjacent to the subdivision, and that needs to be a separate request to the city council then from this special exception. I need to grab the pointer real quick if we've got that available. So this is a legislative decision. Our code defines this as a legislative matter. I'm going to go ahead and read the decision statement on that. When the city is acting on is considering a legislative matter, the city has wide discretion in taking legislative action. Examples of legislative action are general plan, zoning map, and land use text amendments. Legislative actions require that the Planning Commission give a recommendation to the City Council. Typically, the criteria for making a decision related to a legislative matter require compatibility with the general plan and existing codes. And then background on this project. There have been quite a few meetings with the applicant in the last year that have been related to tonight's application. The applicant's agent appeared before the City Council on March 13th requesting that North Ogden City consider amending the cul-de-sac length standard. The Planning Commission then discussed this at the April 4th and April 18th, 2018 meetings. Then on the 6th of June of 2018, the Planning Commission reviewed a draft amendment, and they held a public hearing and recommended that ordinance. And then on July 17th, the City Council approved that special exception ordinance amendment. The Planning Commission then recommended approval of this specific request under that ordinance for this subdivision on October 3rd, so fairly recently of 2018. And then just as a related note for context in this background is that, so the applicant owns this property right here outlined in the bold black line, as well, and then also owns property to the west. There's a specific section in our special exceptions ordinance regarding lengthening of cul-de-sacs, which is the amendment that was passed this year. I'm going to go ahead and read the criteria which govern the approval and consideration of special exceptions. It's important to note that our ordinance specifically states that all of these following criteria need to be met in order for special exception to be approved. And so it's the council's determination whether those all of those criteria are met. The first is that the maximum cul-de-sac length with a special exception extension is 750 feet. So what that's stating is that even if the special exception is approved, the maximum length that can be granted under an exception is 750 feet. There's the second criteria is that there's no reasonable opportunity for connecting to the adjoining street network at this time. If connectivity to an adjoining property can be made in the future, a development agreement is required specifying the conditions and timing of the improvement. In other words, providing for a fire access road or right-of-way dedication as examples. The third criteria is that the property to be subdivided is an infill and surrounded by developed subdivisions. The fourth criteria is that the maximum acreage of the subdivision to be served is 5 acres. The fifth criteria is if a special exception is granted, connectivity to trails and pedestrian walkways may be required by the Planning Commission after considering a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Department. And then the sixth criteria is that if a special exception is granted, the number of lots on the cul-de-sac may be up to 20 as approved by the Planning Commission. I'm going to go through staff's comment on each of these criteria. And actually, there's one more item that I wanted to bring to your attention that as part of the ordinance, it states that the City Council may require such conditions as will, in its judgment, secure substantially the objectives of the standards or requirements of these regulations. The Planning Commission may recommend any conditions it feels is relevant to the approval of the special exception. The key point being there that should the council decide to approve the special exception, you have the ordinance states that you are allowed to make as conditions of approval anything that you feel is relevant to securing the objectives of the ordinance. In other words, you have the ability to add conditions to the approval.
Brandon, can I ask you a question before
requirements
you go?
To the
ask a question, or is that permitted?
Sure.
As I work through this, so the Planning Commission recommended approval of the special exception for this on October 3rd. So 12.1.12 is this. Did the Planning Commission have this information? Points 1 through 6?
They did. This is a similar staff report as what was presented to them. Okay. It's been updated to reflect their actions to share that information with you.
Thank you.
You bet. So staff's comment on that part about the council's ability to include conditions as part of the approval should it be granted is that, again, all of the criteria need to be met in order for the ordinance to qualify for a special exception. Regarding the first condition of the maximum length, the last version of the subdivision that we received was the cul-de-sac length was measured at 751.34 feet. So it's a very minor matter, but it needs to be, even if it's granted, it needs to be reduced by 1.34 feet. The second issue about whether there's a reasonable opportunity for connecting to the adjoining street network at this time, or a condition for a development agreement if the connection can be made in the future. This is staff's comment on that. There is potential for the extension of 1750 North eastward, which is the street that comes into the west. If you could pull up Google Maps, I'll keep going with this and we'll reference it in a minute. So there's potential for the extension of 1750 North, which exists to the west, to meet with the property contained in this subdivision. There's also property at the southwest corner of the subdivision plat that's owned by the city. And this has specifically been noted as having been set apart to be dedicated as a road. And actually, I'm going to ask you to pull up the Stonehouse plat as well. It's one of the exhibits in the staff report. It should be Exhibit F, so near the end of the packet. There's a small piece of property right here that John's zooming in on that it states specifically on the plat that this is the city property and it's to be it's for the purpose of a future road dedication. It says future 1750 North Street. I don't know the number of years that plat's been recorded, but it's been in place for quite a while and specifically calls out that the purpose of that property is to be reused for a road that extends 1750 North. Further, there's a building permit that was approved for a home on the existing parcel prior to this subdivision application, the 2.93 acre parcel that was applied for in June and was approved specifically on August 17th. Construction on that home began in the last few weeks with a footing inspection occurring on October 1st and a foundation inspection on October 16th. It's important to note that subdivision and building permits are separate. The applicant met the requirements to build a home, but then there's different requirements for subdivision, and at the time that that staff approved that. There was no subdivision, approved the building permit for the home. There was no subdivision application that had been submitted. In further detail regarding that is that during the time that the home was that the building permit for the home was being reviewed and had not yet been approved, the applicant for this special exception request stated to staff that the property included in this subdivision would not be subdivided at this time. Also, during the time that this building permit had been applied for and not yet approved, staff wrote a letter to the applicant informing the applicant that placing the home in the proposed location may impact the ability of this property to be subdivided due to eliminating the opportunity for a road that meets our right-of-way standards to extend to the western edge of the subdivision. That would thus place the cul-de-sac beyond the standard maximum permitted length. This letter also informed the applicant prior to the building permit being issued that there was no guarantee that a special exception would be approved to lengthen the cul-de-sac should a home be built in the proposed location, the home that's now under construction, if a road was not extended to the west. Prior to the construction beginning on the home with the property owned by the city and the applicant's property, there has existed prior to the beginning of construction of that home sufficient property to allow a road that meets the city's right-of-way standards extending to the western edge of the subdivision to be put in. Staff is in support of the development, including a street that extends to the western edge of the subdivision that meets the city's LID standards as when that's in the process of being completed. So that would be when it is completed. It should be relatively shortly, and with conditions specified in a development agreement prior to final approval. The City Council needs to determine if there is a reasonable opportunity for a road to go through at this time, or if a development agreement can be entered into that specifies the conditions and timing for construction of a road that connects to 1750 North west of the proposed subdivision. The next criteria, staff's comment is about that the property to be subdivided is an infill and is surrounded by developed subdivisions. Staff comment on that is that staff is of the view that the application meets this requirement. There remains significant potential, however, for subdivision and further development of the property to the west of this subdivision to occur at some point in the future. The fourth criteria is that the maximum acreage of the subdivision is to be served as 5 acres. And this is clearly under 5 acres. Therefore, that requirement is met. On the fifth criteria regarding connectivity and trails, it states that connectivity to trails and pedestrian walkways may be required by the Planning Commission after considering a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Department. Staff's comment on this is as follows. The Parks and Recreation Department has provided some options for trails in the area. And if you could pull up the TRC meeting letter. Based on the general plan, this is an important point that based on the general plan, there's a requirement for a trail in this area. And that trail needs to meet our public works standards, and it needs to go through the subdivision. There's a couple of options which meet the satisfaction of staff as far as that either option would meet the general plan requirement. But I actually need a different picture pulled up. There's a TRC meeting letter that has a couple of options. But regardless of which of those options is chosen, our general plan requires that there be a trail that goes from the north end of the subdivision to the south end of the subdivision. One option would be to take it all the way along the canal. And so that would be one option. Another option would be to take it partially along the canal and then to the through the side of one of the lots to the sidewalk. So the point is that what's required is that it needs to go from one end to the other. Which option is up for consideration? And then there may, I'll discuss this a little bit later, but there may be additional, the City Council, as part of this ordinance, there's the ability to require additional trails as well. So in addition to that standard required trail that's part of the general plan, again, I just said this, but you can require additional trails if you feel like that mitigates the condition of losing a road if the special exception is approved. One consideration for a trail option would be to take a trail segment through to the west here next to the property that was dedicated for the road, and so that it can facilitate children getting to school in a shorter route to Green Acres Elementary, so they don't have to walk out onto, I believe it's 1700 North, onto a busier road. Another option would be to require both of these trail segments so that the trail goes both all the way along the east side of the property along the canal and to the center of the subdivision, so that there's an access point to a larger trailway. That's what that would serve as in that case. Again, one of those two options in the pink is required by our general plan. On the next criteria, it states the 20 lots is the maximum number. This proposes far less than 20 lots. And then again, the ordinance specifies that the city council may require such conditions as will, in its judgment, secure substantially the objectives of the standards or requirements of these regulations, and that the Planning Commission has the ability to recommend any conditions. Staff comment on that would be that conditions that lessen or mitigate the impact of the extended cul-de-sac length, such as the loss of road connectivity and a sidewalk connection, may be the most logical conditions to require for approval if the special exception is approved. And I've already given a couple of examples of this. A trail going to the west of the subdivision for the purpose of school children being able to walk to school easier and have a much shorter path, as well as two segments on the east side connecting to two segments of trail on the east side in order to provide access to the trail system along the east side of the property from the cul-de-sac. Let's see, regarding conformance to the general plan and city ordinances, essentially this issue being is at your discretion or your discernment of whether the subdivision the subdivision hangs on the special exception request, and so what's being decided here is that the city council needs to determine whether they believe that this special exception request meets all of the above criteria that have just been gone through. Let's see. And then to give you the Planning Commission's recommendation, this is almost verbatim, not quite but very close to the way their motion was stated. The Planning Commission recommended approval of this special exception request, provided that there is a north-south trail access through the subdivision that connects somewhere to the interior of the subdivision and to the north side of the property. And so their recommended requirement was that the trail go from the north end of the property specifically to the sidewalk, is what they were referring to based on the conversation that was had, so that that would mitigate that, with the loss of a road being extended to the west, that a trail be provided in lieu of that to still allow walkability for people through the subdivision, and at least somewhat mitigate the loss of walkability in the area. I think that covers the content of what I have in my staff report. What questions do you have for me? Councilmember Swanson.
I'd like to just step back and take kind of a 30,000-foot view of this thing. I'm going back to March. I just had a little heartburn over this. So in March, the initial request was made for the cul-de-sac length, right, for a subdivision that hadn't been laid out, but the request was being made to increase it to 750 feet. In April, 2 Planning Commission meetings were held where that was discussed. Early June, Planning Commission comes up with a draft amendment. All this while, the subdivision is still in the works, shall we say. Planning Commission comes up with a draft amendment, and then in July, the City Council approves that amendment. At that point in time, the subdivision was still in the works. Nobody had said we're not going to do the subdivision at this time, at that point.
No, not to my knowledge.
So at that point, when the council approved the amendment, the subdivision would not have met criteria 2 because there was sufficient land for the road to go from the west through there, okay? Seeing that that didn't happen, then it appears that the applicant withdrew the subdivision request, came back to the city with just a lot request to be built. And Matt, I can't wait to see your home because I know you do things top notch. I just know how you are. And I'll help you lay the sod, by the way, when you're ready for that.
I'll call you.
We'll have a sod party. So the subdivision is effectively withdrawn from consideration, and all the city is asked to consider is that southwest lot. City gives approval because there's no reason not to. The house is placed in such a way that the road cannot go through. It effectively blocks the road. There's no way a road can go through there now. And as soon as that occurs, then the subdivision is back on, and we're being asked for a 750-foot cul-de-sac because now it meets all 6 criteria. 2 effectively being eliminated by the placement of the home in such a way, and that's why we sent the letter to them, that it could affect the subdivision, the home being placed in such a way that the undesired road could not be built. That's my 30,000-foot view. Is that correct?
The only adjustment to that I would offer is that we did not receive, just to be clear, I'm not saying you're saying this, but sure. Just to be clear, we did not receive formal application for the subdivision until I believe it was sometime in September. Right. Clearly, and I think that you've been very clear about stating this, is that the impetus and what was the catalyst of what was driving this special exception ordinance amendment was that they wanted to propose a subdivision.
Correct.
And so it was very clearly that was being discussed.
There had been 3 or 4 presentations made in front of the city council about the discussion, including the discussion about 1750. Both sides, the city kind of wanting that road to be there, the applicant not wanting the road to be there for understandable reasons. And that discussion had been ongoing since March, even though the formal application didn't apply till September. But that informal discussion had been going on with City Council and with Planning Commission.
That's correct, as well as with staff.
And for me, that creates heartburn. I have to be very honest. It appears that we've been gamed. That it was very clear that the city wanted that road there, and that with the amendment that was passed on recommendation from the Planning Commission, and then the City Council passed it, that 1750 was still very much an option because there was sufficient land to be there. The subdivision is informally or formally, well, it would be informally because it hadn't been formally proposed at that point, is withdrawn. It was expressed to you that we're not going to do it at this time. All we want is that lot. The house is placed in such a way that the road can't go through. And then immediately, the subdivision is back on for discussion again. And now we have to have a longer cul-de-sac or trails only because now we'd have to tear down a house to put the road in. As a council member, that feels like I'm being gamed. Just straight up. The timing is too convenient. The sequence is too convenient for it to be anything other than a premeditated thought. In my mind, it can't happen just as vehemently opposed as the applicant was to that road, to then withdraw the subdivision, put the house in where the road can't no longer be built, and then immediately request the subdivision again. It's just too fishy for me. It's just too fishy. That being said, I mean, I've been toying over this. I've been losing sleep over this. This has been really aggravating for me. My biggest concern at this point is the connectivity through the community. I understand that the applicant isn't very willing to put trails in, that there's some resistance to that. putting the trails through so that there's some neighborhood connectivity through, and I have a real problem with that. Given the sequence and the timing of events that effectively block 1750, and then the resistance to any kind of a trail going through there, which is mandated by our general plan, I don't see much cooperation on the part of the applicant. As it stands right now, I'm completely opposed to the extension. The other issue that I have is that the applicant came in asking for annexation, and there are certain fees that have to be paid because the city has to expend that money to give the required legal noticing. That money's been expended by the city, but it hasn't been paid by the applicant. I think for just to cut the evening short and not make this any longer than it needs to be, I don't know why we're considering the special exception when the applicant hasn't fully committed to making the annexation. I'm unwilling to grant a special exception when I don't even know if the applicant's going to follow through with the annexation. That's where I stand. So I would propose that we move this to another meeting to discuss the actual special exception, provided, and that meeting be held once the applicant has actually paid the fees that are due for the annexation process to continue through. That would be my recommendation.
Just to clarify, is your concern only the payment of the fees, or that the property be also that the annexation?
My concern, to be very blunt at this point, is that if the city's already paid the money for the legal noticing that's supposed to be paid by the applicant for annexation, we've already outed that money. My concern is that if the special exception isn't granted, as has been expressed by the applicant to several staff members, that we may not annex. And they'll withdraw, and then we're out the money and we haven't been paid for the fees. The fees for annexation are there for everybody who wants to annex. Pay the fees, decide whether or not you're going to be annexed, and then once you're in the city, then we can decide whether or not the city can grant a special exception. Right now, that land is in county. We're not legally allowed to grant special exceptions. We have that one lot that we have an interlocal with the county for development. We don't with the rest of that land. We don't have the authority to say we're going to grant a special exception. I'm unwilling to grant that special exception until the applicant is committed to annexing into the city and paid the fees that are due, as every other annexing applicant has to do.
Brandon, is there, are we saying, I thought tonight we were just simply trying to decide about the special exception for the cul-de-sac, but it seems to me you're trying to say that granting that special exception seems to be connected to extending 1750.
So the special exception.
There's a contingency on this cul-de-sac length.
The special exception request is to allow a cul-de-sac that is longer than 600 feet. So the point being that staff is in support of that road going through, is the short version.
Okay, when you say road, though, you're talking cul-de-sac.
If I can add, Blake, part of the reason is that with 1750 coming through, the cul-de-sac length is measured from 1750 north, not from 1700 north. So we don't have to worry about 600 feet being beyond 600 feet. That cul-de-sac, if 1700 came through, that cul-de-sac would effectively be 150, 170 feet long. The only reason we need to go to a 750-foot cul-de-sac is because we cannot get 1750 through. Prior to that, the discussion had been, we don't necessarily need a 750-foot cul-de-sac because we can bring 1750 through. Cul-de-sac, but 1750 comes through. That subdivision was withdrawn. The application, the interlocal with the county for that southwest lot was granted. Permits were granted. The home was started. Again, I can't wait to see the house. Right where it would block the road. So now 1750 is not an option unless we tear out Matt's foundation. Which forces us into a discussion of having a 750-foot cul-de-sac in order for that subdivision to happen.
Well, I operate on the idea of precedence, and we've got other cul-de-sacs that are 750 feet, right up on 2600.
All I can say is that in my time at the city, we've tried to follow the regulations. I don't know how those got approved or if they were prior to the 600-foot limit, but we're bound by our ordinance to stick with 600 unless there's a special exception applied for.
But we do operate on precedents.
I don't know that that's fair to say. We try to operate according to the ordinance.
And I think the ordinance allowed that, or there was a discussion and a presentation to the council at the time the one on 2600 was approved. And that was part of the decision in creating the special exception ordinance, was to allow for a longer subdivision in the right, or longer cul-de-sac in the right situation.
So this doesn't fit that right situation?
No, that's
Up to us to decide.
That's what the council needs to
Well,
decide.
I took up, I'll be honest, I took Paul Mackley's invitation to go and look, and quite honestly, I wouldn't want a road to divide my property. His barn is on the other side of the road.
So what we're stating is that he has the right. No one's trying to restrict his right to use the property as it currently is, but he's in the position of currently asking not for the existing use of the property, but in asking for additional vested rights for development. In other words, he's asking to take this property from agricultural land to a 5-lot subdivision.
So then what you're saying seems to suggest, maybe clarify for me, but now what you're saying is it's not tied to 1750 being extended.
If 1750 were extended completely
From the west to the east side.
like to meet up with this, then a special exception would not be needed. So this special exception is being applied for because the applicant would prefer not to put that road through, all the way through. And so staff's view on the position is that the road should go through. So the determination is whether there's a reasonable opportunity for the road to extend to the west edge of the subdivision.
And you're saying that the planning council knew when they approved it that it was tied to the 1750 extension?
I'm not sure what you mean by tied to it.
Well, it sounds like there's a contingency, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding this.
The condition imposed by recommended by the Planning Commission was that a trail go from the north end of the property to the south end of the property, and specifically one that connects into the cul-de-sac, so that the residents of it could access that trail.
That was from the October 3rd meeting, correct?
That's correct.
So again,
that was the condition.
But in the June and July meetings, in the June meetings with the Planning Commission, and in July when City Council approved the amendment, the trail piece was not talked about at that point. We were talking about 1750 in the cul-de-sac, 1750 going through in the cul-de-sac. The trail piece that the Planning Commission is recommending to be required as a result of the October 3rd, well after the home application was made and the footings have been dug and those kinds of things were done, effectively blocking 1750 from coming through. The point I'm trying to make is that as the ordinance was amended in July, the applicant would not have met all 6 criteria, and they knew that, because it was reasonable that 1750 could come through. Item number 2.
So cumulative, by the time October 3rd rolls around, the Planning Commission has been informed that the condition...
A home has been placed where the road can't go, so the road can't go through anymore, so now we're stuck. That's what the Planning Commission was having to deal with.
Council members, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have 2 planning commissioners here that can shed light on the history of this if you so choose. And also you have the Parks Director who can talk about the trail.
Oh, we're going to get to the trails.
So just one clarifying point on the trail, it's a requirement that it go from the north to the south end of the property, either along the canal or mostly along the canal into the cul-de-sac. Which of those options it takes, of those 2 options, it can be decided by the council, but it needs to take one of those 2 options based on our general plan. So the trail probably didn't come up during the earlier discussions because we hadn't had the opportunity to do a formal review of the subdivision and find that in our general plan and apply it to the situation. That's why it's come up now, because, you know, when we do a subdivision review, we go through all the requirements, and, you know, it's a checklist essentially.
We were still talking and pushing the possibility of 1750 as well.
Correct.
It seems like, you know, because I've noticed that trail, which obviously parallels the North Ogden Canal. It stops. Well, it ends at the north end of Paul Mackley's property, and then should connect at the head gates and goes to what would be that next street where the purple line ends. And then it's completely non-existent from that point north all the way up through Legacy North subdivision. No trail. So how are we going to get a trail from that point through all those backyards when we've generally expected that to be taken care of by developers?
I don't know the answer to that question exactly. I know that the calls have been made to the canal company to get trail access along there. We've not yet been able to be successful in having that conversation with them. But development, you know, the subdivision is our easiest opportunity to get a trail in. And so I don't know, I can't answer how all of the trails are, you know, all the other segments of the trail are in, but I also know that trails are typically a condition of subdivision at the time of subdivision when a development is put in. And so, you know, we don't want to sacrifice, and according to our general plan, we're not at liberty to sacrifice this segment of the trail simply because other portions of it are not in. And that if we head down that path, we run the risk of not getting any portions of the trail in because, you know, other portions aren't in, and then it becomes a domino scenario where, you know, well, we can't build this because nothing else is built first. So subdivision is the city's opportunity to administer and enforce its general plan.
I just, in my mind, I guess in my mind, I wonder how come we haven't communicated with the North Ogden Canal Company, because it seems like there'd be an exposure for liability there that they would not want.
We've been trying to get in contact with them and haven't been successful at this point.
Over a couple of months, we haven't been able to contact them?
I don't know how long, but yeah, we haven't received return calls. We haven't had our calls returned.
I think before we actually proceed, I think we need to find out exactly what the North Ogden North Ogden Canal Company would say. Because it would seem to me that they would not want to have the liability of a trail next to the canal.
My understanding is that the applicant owns this property.
So
where
I
the
just
trail
think
would
they're
go.
covered. So these guys have been dominating the conversation, and so I want to talk.
Okay.
I don't agree with Phil, and that's okay. I'm okay with the exception. I'm okay with the Planning Commission recommendation. I think the trail has to go in. As far as trails go, they don't have to be a trail. They can connect to a sidewalk. Part of the problem we've had is with the city is the subdivisions. I was on the council when we had the ordinance put in for the trails to be in subdivisions because, and Tiffany can remember this, we lost connections. And the sidewalks can become a connection. So that trail can just go up and connect to a sidewalk, and then it can go around. As far as, Paul and I have had our own differences of opinions on things. I don't feel like we were played. They talked about this cul-de-sac when they started talking about the exception a long time ago. I mean, I remember seeing the plat drawing about how they withdrew it and all that other stuff. I know how planners and developers work. That stuff happens all the time. But I remember seeing it originally. And when we made the motion and to agree to a 750-foot extension we knew that this was a potential.
We never made that motion.
Pardon me?
We didn't make that motion. That's why we're here tonight.
No, when we made it the exception in our on the ordinance, when we changed it from a 600-foot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we knew that this was a potential here. We also knew there was potential elsewhere, and we actually had that plat at time, because I remember looking at it in fact, talking to Ryan and how he felt about it as far as the fire marshal, the length of it. So that's where I sit. As far as moving it to another meeting and stuff, I'm indifferent to that, but I don't see a problem with this extension. And at this point, with the house being built and stuff, I still don't see an extension. This is the planning commission has reviewed this and looked at it, and I feel like their recommendation is valid, and I would agree with their recommendation. I also think that sometimes we overcomplicate things. 1750 is not going to go through. They got a house there. It's not going to go through. And
right.
so I don't feel like we were played. Phil, you may feel that way, and that's okay. But at this point, I just think this is where we're at. Let's give them the extension and let's build a nice little community. But I want the trail through there.
I agree with you on the cul-de-sac, that we are at a point where we don't really have an option any other way. My concern has been, up until this afternoon, the flat resistance by the applicant to put the trails in. I don't want the trails in has been the word. I don't want to put those trails in. And
I've heard that comment, but I haven't heard him say he wouldn't put it in. I've heard him say that he doesn't want to put them in, but you get that from almost any developer when you start talking to him about putting trails in.
I was going to say, I've heard it from many developers.
Exactly.
Well, not many, everyone.
I've heard it from several developers. The subdivision they did behind my house, they didn't want to put a trail in.
Right.
But guess what? They're putting it in.
But for me, and again, this is just me, in totality, the placing of the home to specifically, in my mind, block 1750, the withdrawal of the subdivision, and asking only for that corner lot so that 1750 could be blocked, and then the applicant's continued resistance, no cooperation, no desire or expressed desire to put the trails in, a continued resistance to put the trails in, has led me to believe that the applicant doesn't want the road and the applicant doesn't want the trails.
Who approved the plat for the home?
The building permit?
The building permit.
So who was that?
It was myself in the building department.
That was the city. Then the city knew that 1750, we could have said no at that point.
Well, actually, we couldn't have legally on the building permit. Is that correct, John?
The building complied with the current.
So we couldn't have said no because it complied with current building code and ordinance.
Do we need to have additional information from the other two members of the?
So real
I read the report.
Real
I'm
quick,
fine
one
with what they
point.
said.
We also have our Parks and Recreation Director here. So if there aren't any further questions for me specifically,
I'll just sum up my position and then I'll shut up because I've said enough. As long as we get the trails from north to south, I'm fine with the cul-de-sac being 750 feet. As long as we get those trails, I'm fine. But again, in my mind, intentionally block 1750 and then be resistant to putting in the trails says something. If the trails go in so that we have that connectivity, so that eventually we do have a trail system, it's no different than sidewalks when we require an infill subdivider to build sidewalks. Even though there aren't sidewalks on either side, we still require them. The trail needs to go in. If the trail goes in, I'm fine with the cul-de-sac.
I just want to say that I agree with the special exception, especially when it's based on the Planning Commission. Personally, from my feeling on the trail, I think we need to contact the North Ogden Canal Company and find out what their feelings are on that.
okay.
I can't see why after 6 or 7 months we haven't had input from North Ogden Canal Company.
Have you ever tried?
I can understand that.
I would think that
If they
6 or
don't
7
return a
months
call,
after.
we can't talk to them.
They're terrible to get hold of.
Response.
Well, then I'm certainly not trying to blame the city, but I think that some kind of additional effort may have been needed to contact them.
Okay.
Phone call, letter, stop by the house, knock on the door.
Wouldn't
This is
that be
what's
the
being
applicant's
considered.
responsibility since it's his property?
I don't know whose
And
responsibility it is, Phil.
it's city master plan? Wouldn't that be the applicant's
Quite
responsibility?
honestly, the way I look at it, I don't think the trail is a necessity. Because we missed the trails from 1700 to 2100, and then it doesn't even pick up there. It's
So do we
completely
not put
buried.
sidewalks in infill subdivisions either?
We have places where we don't have sidewalks.
Right, but we've been requiring them of every infill developer,
I'm
whether
just
or
saying
not
that-
there's connecting sidewalks.
I'm not an attorney, but it seems like most law cases are based on precedents.
Now, this isn't a legal precedent.
No, it's not, but I look at other special exceptions in the city as being a precedent for what we're doing here.
Okay. Are there other questions for me?
Nope.
Okay.
But I would like to see, I mean, if we don't come to a complete vote tonight or a consensus, I would like to have, and if this is proposed, prolonged to another meeting, I'd really like to hear what the North Ogden Canal Company would say.
Does it have to go through North Ogden Canal Company, or can it go another avenue?
Well, it's proposed just to follow parallel to the North Ogden Canal Company, to the canal.
It's just one option. The other option doesn't require that at all.
Well, and
Well, then we need to, I would like to see the other option then.
when you talk about
Well,
precedents,
it would go along,
trails
it would
along
go
canals all
along
the
the
time.
canal for at least part of the property
And then shoot west.
to the center of the cul-de-sac.
Ryan, you got anything to say? No. Or not?
No, I was kind of. I read the planning commission's minutes, 23 pages worth. But I want to make sure I understand them right. If they're proposing we need a trail, I agree. We need a trail.
Nicole?
Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Both of you could.
Both of you.
Yep. Okay. We kind of looked at it, and you know, as everything has gone on. First off, when we did the proposal for the subdivision extension, we knew that the cul-de-sac extension, we knew that there was something in the works. We had no idea. 1750 had never been mentioned when we made the proposal for the. It was like, yeah, we knew we were talking about a subdivision that nobody was talking about. You know, the subdivision or that cannot be named while we were doing it. And there was a little bit of frustration because the foundation of the house would block access to it. There's another thought, too, that just in this case, the same one who is developing the subdivision was also the adjacent property owner to the west. That isn't always the case. And in this case, it's kind of convenient. It's like, okay, yeah, we can make you do that, you know, where if somebody else owned it, it wouldn't have even been on the table. Or if their timing were a little bit different, you know, 6 months different, it wouldn't have been on the table. So just taking a pragmatic look at it, we said, okay, the foundation is there. We don't want to make them rip it out. But all possibility of connectivity is gone if we don't go through on 1750. So the trail is a necessity. To compensate for the loss of 1750, the trail is required. And that was kind of where it all ended up. You know, the other of all of the 6 conditions, that was the issue was, you know, as we discussed it, the issue was, you know, was this connectivity a possibility? Well, yes, it was. No, it isn't. And so then, and, you know, we had the recommendation and the general plan, the recommendation from the Parks Department and the general plan both saying we needed a trail there. So that was kind of what drove us to the recommendation that we did. That yes, we will approve this, recommend approval of the special exception, but only on the condition that the trail goes through. Any questions? We've got Nicole here.
You summed it up very well. I think the only thing that I would want to emphasize when we talk about that trail is that when we talk about the special exception and the criteria for it, all of them must be met. And that 5th criteria on the connectivity, that specifically addresses that trail. And so I would say that from the Planning Commission's standpoint, without the condition of the trail, that they don't meet the requirement for a special exception.
Number 5, though, says it may be required, not that it must be required, which would take away the mandate.
Right. But it was also based on, you know, first off, that maybe, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, it may be required if recommended by the Parks Department. I believe it's something to that effect.
Well, it says if a special exception is granted, connectivity to trails and pedestrian walkways may be required by the Planning Commission after considering a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Department.
Okay. And it was definitely recommended by the Parks and Recreation.
So in your recommendation, you're saying it is a requirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Specifically, the motion mentioned that that the trail should go through to the interior of the cul-de-sac. The basis for the basic requirement for the trail from the north to the south is the general plan. What required it or recommended it to go to the center of the cul-de-sac was the Planning Commission's motion.
And that would be the dotted purple line to the left there?
Yes, there's two dotted lines.
Two dotted lines.
Yeah, there's one that goes to the east along the canal, or we can cut through and go right to the top of the cul-de-sac.
Now understand that if this special exception is granted, that cul-de-sac will be longer. It'll go further to the north.
Right.
And then when the applicant, the developer, brings us the plan for subdivision approval, we'll see where they propose to put that trail. I don't know if we have to decide that exactly now, but
no. Right now, we had granted preliminary approval on the subdivision based on granting the special exception, and there was also a question because the way the road is drawn on the preliminary plan, it doesn't meet the road width standard either. It was drawn as if it was an LID road, and we don't have a standard for LID roads, so it would have to, meet those two requirements before we grant final approval. Any other questions?
Oh, but thank you for being here tonight.
Tiffany, anything you'd like to add? Our Parks and Recreation Director?
I just want to provide a little bit of clarity as to these lines. This is a map that I drew out. The recommendation for the trail north-south, that solid pink line, is based off the general plan. So when we go into subdivision reviews or stuff such as this, I take the general plan approved by the city council and the general direction for where trails ought to go through those subdivisions, and that is what I push through to come to you. So I am enforcing the general plan as you have approved it, for that pink line to go through there. The other thing to note is when I was approached with this subdivision questions about the trail, my first question was the yellow line. That was on the east side. And my question was actually to the planning department. I said, is there an easement along this piece of property for trail? The trail's not currently built, but is there an easement for it? And they've been working, trying to get a hold of Pineview to find that out. This subdivision was put in before I was here, and I do not understand going forward, why the trail isn't there to begin with. It happens in places, but as Carl said, that's how we lose connectivity. If you don't choose to require a trail up to the top, you will lose the connectivity between those two roads there. And that's what's happened where this yellow line is. So that was my question. I said, is there an easement for a trail? If there is, we need to find out why it wasn't built. And if there is, that's great. It follows the general plan. If there's not, we've lost that connection, and that blue line that I've drawn in there, the sidewalk, now becomes the default trail to maintain the connectivity between the top and bottom. So that's the explanation for the lines there. The pink is part of the city's general plan approved by the council for the trail to go through. The dotted lines are my showing that there needs to be some connection. We need to maintain connectivity. We don't build trails to nowhere. So we need to maintain connectivity between that north end and either the yellow line where an easement to a trail or a future trail would be, or to the sidewalk, which becomes the default trail when connectivity was lost and a trail wasn't put in the first place as it should have been. So that's why my strong recommendation to you is to put in the trail as is written in the general plan so that we maintain connectivity north to south and we don't run into problems like this yellow line in the future in other places as development continues.
Thank you.
So, council, the applicant is here, and typically when staff is done, the applicant presents. So.
Hello, Jim Flynn, 538 North Main Street, Brigham City. Thank you. I know it's been a laborious thing, and you've heard us several times. I'll speak succinctly to just three issues. I think the three issues before us. The first one is on the special exception, the 750-foot road. In our opinion, once that's granted, the purpose is nullified for the need to have the stub street going west. I acknowledge staff has been consistent in their assertion that that is needed regardless. We think we've been upfront in the peripheral sense of saying we need this exception granted, and if that exception is granted, it removes the need for going west. So that's a fundamental basis. We feel that the need is nullified with the special exception being granted. The second thing is some things you've got special exceptions before you tonight, and you've got a preliminary map before you. The second thing has to do with the road. There's an existing awkward stub street that's 25 feet on one side, 32 feet on the other one. I don't know how it got dedicated that way. That's the Stonehouse Stub Street. It's been proffered that because on the plat it only had the word road dedication, that somehow that can't be used for commonly peripheral purposes. What I'm saying is there's currently a sewer line, and because of Dr. Mackley's cooperation, a storm line that goes through that. We're proposing as part of the preliminary plan. Now, my understanding is this is not a special exception. This is a special request that only the city council can grant. We would like to use that for the minor drainage pond. And the reasoning behind that is it's already existing, it's in a dormant state. Why not use it? If we don't do it for that purpose, either an HOA has to be formed, which is for a drainage pond maintenance kind of it's more of a nightmare than it's worth, or the city, a fee simple dedication has to be made to the city, and the city has to own a separate piece of property, own and maintain that also additionally. So that is part of that. That's on the preliminary map side. That's a special request that we're making to the city council tonight. The third thing is the trail, and we can all see different sides of this. The reality is there's a disjointed segment right now. Right now, the canal company owns a little bit coming south of 1850. Ironically, there's an undedicated part on the east side of the canal. And then it runs to about the Stonehouse subdivision. It was just the way it was granted. Then on the west side, that yellow trail that's depicted, we all know that that goes through a bunch of backyards that are fenced. Confusing. I just bring up there's a disjointed nature right now that exists. It could be argued that there are good paved streets just to the east, just to the west. So I think the issue before you tonight is, as I see it, is there a compelling need to have a north-south trail sandwiched between two paved roads that currently the children don't even go north-south through that field. They actually currently hop the fence and go west. That's the current pattern. To me, that's the issue before you tonight. As far as the north-south connectivity, the sidewalk is going to be put in the subdivision. I want to make sure that's understood. So the cul-de-sac bulb will have a sidewalk, and it seems like the logical north-south trail would branch off of that cul-de-sac, not go through two additional lot backyards. But I think there are other people. I'm speaking as an engineer tonight to these three issues. My understanding that the neighborhood has strongly spoken to two of them. One is about the stub street going west, that the neighbors don't desire it. The second one is about the trail. And that's, I concur from a practicality and a connectivity point of view. I can't see, and the liability, I don't know how the canal company, it's such a disjointed situation going through there, what the canal owns, where there's existing no man's land on the east side of the trail, where there's fenced yards to the Stonehouse subdivision. I just offer that backdrop. And but those are the three issues as I see them. We're happy to answer any. I'm not going to be verbose. I know we've been. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or later.
I've got one. Well, here's my concern with the trail and why I feel strongly about it. Right now, I know your family's buying the land, you're building the houses, and it'll be your kids going out. Whether you go to the west across your family's property, that's fine. Families don't always stay on land that they build on. I think my family has shown that. We move off of the land, you get neighbors move in, and now you don't want those kids out going across your property. That's my concern with the trail, why we need it. If a kid's going to walk to Green Acres from one of these new lots we're building and we don't have a trail, they got to go clear down to 1700 over, and it's almost doubles the commute. And so that's my concern with the trail. I know you.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Let me.
Or
I'll let the others speak to the trail.
But that's why I feel strongly that we need a trail. We need some way to get out. Green Acres is to the north and west, so we need some connectivity to the northwest.
Well, and the other piece with the trail is that the Planning Commission has said that the condition upon which this extension should be granted is if the trail is there.
Yep.
If there isn't going to be a trail, then there is no extension granted,
so
in my mind. That's what the Planning Commission, that's the condition that the Planning Commission put on this special exception, and I'm willing to do it on their recommendation with the trail. If the trail's not there, then, I mean, the home that we just bought was used as a cut-through for kids coming out of Bates until we bought the home, because the two previous homeowners had always allowed the kids to come through the gate, come through the yard, and we caught quite a bit of flack from neighbors because we put a lock on the gate and told the kids, you got to go around. Can't cut through the park and then cut through my yard.
He's my case in point.
And you know, well, as soon as you said that, I was thinking that happened to us last year when we bought this new home, and it had been used for 20 plus years. 24 years the house has been there. That kids would cut through, open the gate, and come through, and just help themselves to take a shortcut home. And it was interesting, the flack we caught when we locked that gate.
It's funny because my first Matt Lund, 826 East. My very first thought is, I'm sitting here having this conversation in my head, and I believe in community. I believe, one, I think there's value in connecting through neighborhoods. It is my personal belief that it's not the government's place to dictate that. As a property owner, you should have, just as you did, Phil, the say in who you let through, who you don't. Elementary school kids, I'll let through my property all day long, every day, right? The druggies that have been arrested multiple times in the neighborhood to the north of us, that's exactly who every single person in this room does not want sitting in their backyard doing who knows what with whoever, And so I think a property owner should have the ability to decide that for their own property based on the circumstances and the safety and the protection and however they evaluate their situation. With that said, I myself, I love hiking. I utilize trails. I see value in them. I see absolutely no practical value in a trail here. And the reason why, about 100 feet to the east, and then just a little bit further to the west, there are already two roads with sidewalks that go through. I personally have talked to probably 25 different property owners that touch this property about a number of different issues. And it's not even a majority, it is absolutely 100% unanimous that they do not want to see a trail go through. They don't want the road to go through. And so my question is, if there's no value for the people that are there, I understand, futuristic planning and planning for these, maybe they will, maybe they won't, people that will move in. But if there's no value and no desire from the people that are there, what in the world are we doing serving our make-believe community in the future? I think it's worth considering. I think it's worth the discussion. It doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't provide any additional value to anybody that's currently there. And there was a planning commission member that sat right there and said, I'm not sure I see value in it. I know nobody wants it. Maybe there is no value in it, but it's on the master plan. We got to do it. And so he acknowledged there's literally no value in this. I agree with that, but it's on the master plan, so we're going to do it. And I just, my last comment, I want to address a couple of things out of respect for people that my inflammatory personality may have offended, but I'll leave that for later because it's redundant right now. But I sit here and I listen, and we've had the opportunity to work with so many great people, some differing ideas, some identical ideas. It's always, it's just the circus of it all, I guess. But I sit here and I listen, and I hear different members, mostly from staff, say, well, you could make them this, and you could make them that. And what in the world are we doing? Every single one of you ran for office, and I mean, that alone, like surviving that, is incredible because it's a bloodbath. It's a horrific time to be involved in politics. You just get shredded, and here you are somehow. And there was something that motivated you to come and be involved and make a difference. Every single one of you have your own motives, your own agendas, and it all motivated you enough to come and make a difference. And then I sit here as a citizen, as someone who has lived in North Ogden his whole life in multiple locations, would like to stay in North Ogden permanently. It's been a year since we started this conversation, and it took us 9 months to get permission to build on our own land. Our own land. And then we sit here and I listen, well, we can make them do this and we can make them do that. Right there, I have all the respect in the world for Tiffany. Let me be very clear about that. I talked to her about this, and she was nothing short of impressive. But she asks, is there any way to see if the city has an easement behind those homes? Can we make people that already have homes, that have lived there for 15 years since the thing was put in, can we make them put a cut through right through their backyard? Can we make them? And it's maybe a question of philosophy, but I don't. North Ogden's better than that. And we're better than to have this, well, I'm now so-and-so and I was elected and I have all the power. Not a single one of you actually feel that way. And I know that because I know all of you. But when I sit and listen to the, can we make them, and not one single time has the question been asked, how can we help them? And it's wrong. And every single one of you are better than that. And I think it's really easy to get emotionally charged and try and make decisions on that, but it's pretty simple. By waiting as long as we have, we've incurred personally a cost of a minimum of $15,000 more that the exact same house is going to cost us because of all these delays. We're all human. We're not perfect. Some delays, I think, were truly just mistakes. There are other things that were absolutely 100% intentional. And so our decision was pretty simple. If my wife and I are going to stay in North Ogden and build here, we're going to build, and we're going to build right now. If that road was going to go through, we absolutely were not going to subdivide. We were not going to build there, and that would stay in the county permanently. But we made the decision because we are committed to this. We're committed to family, to our community. We're committed to North Ogden. And all we ask is that you consider your commitment back to North Ogden as well. Take a step back. Remove some of the emotion. I'm an absolute hypocrite because I operate on emotion all day long. But there's no, like, this whole discussion is about a potential for 4, maybe 5 houses. an opportunity for 4 or 5 additional good, strong community members, families, to come in and strengthen North Ogden, to be involved, maybe fill these chairs someday. If you're ever done with them, stay on them, right? but that's the opportunity, and that's the goal, and it has been nothing short of impossible. We're building the smallest little starter home, and it cost us $20,000 just to get permission to build on our own property. And it's just crazy. Anyways, thank you so much for entertaining us, for hearing us. We're obviously very emotionally charged. We have all the respect in the world for the council members of this council. The Planning Commission has been nothing short of entertaining and just awesome to work with. And we just ask that you consider things as they actually are, not how complicated and smoke and mirrors and everything that this becomes sometimes. And thank you.
Mayor, if I may. Matt, thank you. Appreciate your passion. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that there has to be a planning commission and that there has to be a city council and there has to be codes and code enforcement and those things is because there are landowners who won't do what's in the best interest of the city at large. One of the reasons we have a hodgepodge broken trail is because landowners in the past have not done what's in the interest of the city at large. And so there has to be a governmental entity that comes in and says there must be a trail here. Because if not, you may put the trail in, but your neighbor says, I could care less. And you may decide I'm going to build a beautiful home, and your neighbor decides I'm going to put up a pig farm. Right? I mean, when we speak in true libertarian terms, which is what you were describing there, you get forced living next to a pig farm because that's what your neighbor feels like they want to do. To hell with the community. And so the reason that there is a planning commission, the reason that there is a city council, the reason that we have to have city ordinances, much to the chagrin of many libertarians, is because people cannot get along. And because this neighbor doesn't care what happens on that end of town. This portion right here doesn't care that someday when the trail is completed that this would be an incompleted trail and the trail is useless. Just like the sidewalks. At some point we have to say, if you're going to build, you got to put the sidewalks in. Because there's connectivity, there's reasons that it has to happen, even though your neighbors on either side don't have sidewalks. Same with the trails. Right now, there isn't a contiguous trail system. Someday there will be. If we keep allowing everybody to build without the trails that are on the master plan, there'll never be the trail system. It'll never be there.
To be very clear, we are building next to a pig.
Oh, I know. And you're brave to say that about your father-in-law, He's always been much cleaner than that to me.
I like the pigs. But
well, you like the result of the pigs after harvest.
Paul Mackley, 730 East, 1750 North. I appreciate it, Phil. Thanks for your input. I want to clarify a couple of things, though. If you felt gamed, I want to address that because I could tell it really got you. But let me share with you, when we met 7 months ago, and we got a nod from the City Council to take this proposed cul-de-sac extension amendment. If you recall, the Planning Commission originally voted that down. It came to you as a body. You kicked it back to them and asked, try to work this so there's a way that we can create an option to not build that road. So from the nod we got from this body, we went back to the Planning Commission and asked for that process to be fulfilled, and then we came back to you and it was approved. So our understanding in good faith was that there was support to do away with that road in the circumstances that existed. 12 or 13 years ago, when that other subdivision came through, they did put their utilities through our front yard, and we asked them at that time, will there ever be a road there if we grant you this privilege of draining your subdivision through our front yard? And adamantly they said no. So the manhole is placed on the west of us, on the east of us, so that line can be maintained without a road going in our front yard. So consistent with that granting, when it came time for us to build one home and then maybe 4 or 5 homes, we requested for that exception. That language was created primarily by the planning department. That language did not come from your body, and it did not come from the Planning Commission. It came from the planners. So with that language, as I studied that carefully, when it listed those 6 items, it was carefully crafted in such a way, if that were a legal document, all 6 of those had to be in compliance. And one of the clauses that created the legal confusion was that if there's no reasonable alternative. So that actually, it invited me to make a conscious decision, not to game you, but to give you the opportunity to do what I thought you had done originally, and that was to be supportive of this. So when the Planning Commission realized that, they also were trying to be supportive, and they took that as, I think Alan Lunt on the commission just said, well, it's obvious then, we can go forward now. But we were getting consistent resistance from the staff from the very beginning, and, to be true to their consistency, connectivity is a big deal. It always has been. And so, I think Rob declared that back when the mayor was still in town a year ago, that's what he wanted. And so as I talked with the mayor about it, he says, well, I don't think that you have to build that road if you go through the process. So, you weren't gamed. It was actually based on the specific language created by Rob Scott that created that 6-point, and it's not if some of these are in compliance, but if all of them are in compliance, it forced us into that position. We had no alternative in order to accomplish doing away with the road, which we thought initially was exactly why you, as a council, kicked it back to the Planning Commission to rework it, because they had voted it down initially. And then when Ryan had reviewed it as a fire marshal, he said it's consistent with the International Fire Code. 750, is that true, Ryan? It is. So this special exception,
it's a minimum standard,
is actually consistent with the International Fire Code. So it has become a special exception in an interesting way, because in reality that's consistent with International Fire Code. So it wasn't an intent to game anybody. It was an intent to accomplish what we originally set out to do a year ago. So I feel badly that you feel taken advantage of, but to me it was a consistent pathway from the very beginning that we got a nod from you and we wouldn't have made it this far, honestly, if you hadn't been supportive back in March. So I thank you, whatever the outcome is. I thank you for all that you've done, and it's been an interesting process. I think it's been a great education for Matt and Candace. But it's, it's...
Those guys don't know what they have in store.
And I have to thank Jim Flint, too. He's been so patient and humble and detail-oriented in his research. And so everybody's done their job to the best of their ability. And whatever the outcome is, we're going to be happy. We love North Ogden. But it is interesting to note that not one of those neighbors in that whole area are really in favor of this master plan. They're not really in favor of the road, the trail, or anything associated with it. And so, as a good neighbor, we let them pass through our front yard, and they go to the elementary school. We watch them come and go, and that doesn't bother us. Well, if somebody else buys it in 20 years, Ryan, maybe they won't allow that, just like you didn't, Phil. But while we're there, we're going to allow our neighbors to cross through our front yard, and it's going to be a happy neighborhood. And, it's really interesting as we think about it, but, you use the term libertarian. Planning, and I just can't not say this, planning, if it's properly balanced, is good. But there are times when violation of property rights cross the line, and there's really very little discretion for the private property owner. Takings from a constitutional standpoint occurs when something is taken without compensation against the will of the individual. And so there are public reasons why we take private property, major corridors, sometimes utilities. There's a list of things that are appropriate for a takings to occur, but from a constitutional standpoint, that should be carefully restricted on a basis that's really needed, not just at a whim. And so, we do differ politically and philosophically that sometimes central planning has its own agenda. And when we say it's good for the city, I hope we're not saying it's good for the city staff. I hope we're saying it's good for the citizens. And in a political context, if you get 95% of the people to agree to anything, it's a miracle. And we've got 100% consensus down there. They don't want that. So I think as elected representatives, you have to do your best to represent the people. And sometimes you have to be very unpopular and based on principle, still maybe you go against the people and then maybe get not elected. So anyway, it's been an interesting learning thing for us. We appreciate everything that's gone on, and everybody's contributed something of value. And so, I'll sit down and be quiet, but just thank you. It's been an awesome ride for about a year. It's cost these guys $15,000.
Just 2 comments, if I may, Mayor. One, Paul, you know very well that it's all perspective, what is and what isn't. how far is too far and what isn't too far. It's perspective, and that pendulum swings quite wildly. The other thing to remember, too, is that we're elected to represent 18,000 residents, not 20 homes. So when I'm looking at those trails, I'm not looking at those 20 homes. I'm not looking at those immediate neighbors. I'm looking at what's good for the city as a whole. That's what we've been elected to do. And sometimes we have to make hard decisions and tell people no or tell people yes, because it's in the city's best interest, not in the neighborhood's best interest, in the city's best interest. And sometimes that's just the way it happens, and we'll agree to disagree on some of those things. But I appreciate you.
Okay, council. The item before us then is to discussion or action to consider the special exception.
Can I make one clarification? That the desire to use the little piece that the city currently owns for a detention basin is actually not before the council right now, because you can't give property away without holding a public hearing, though technically, I guess in theory, the property would remain the city's. But that would be done as part of the subdivision. But it might be helpful for staff, for council to indicate if you were okay with that approach, so that we could make sure that the subdivision as it came back through had everything it needed, and we didn't have to come back, for several more meetings. So, thanks.
So, can I make one point? I'm not trying to steer anyone in any direction. I'm very clear about that. But in whatever motion is made, if you choose to accept or to approve the special exception, it would be helpful if you made, and you wanted to include the trail as a requirement. I would just suggest that you be very clear about where you want it to begin and where you want it to end. That helps staff administer, that decision in a clear, effective way, so we're not having guesswork and having to come back.
See, Mayor, I still feel like we're maybe a little bit jumping the gun on the, since the North Ogden Canal Company hasn't been spoken to. So what we're saying is if we approve it, then we're approving the trail, and the North Ogden Canal Company may have different feelings.
Can that be segregated out, John?
When you mean segregated out, what do you mean?
I mean, is that the approval of the cul-de-sac contingent on anything North Ogden Canal Company?
I understand.
I would doubt that they would have any concerns, but.
Well, I understand why. I'm not sure who owns the property, to be quite honest. I know Jim thinks that the canal company clearly owns it. There was a document filed by the canal company back in the 1990s where they claimed an easement for everything where their trail is, or where their canal is, as well as a maintenance trail. So there's a 2-track that runs along a good majority of that trail, or that canal. So I'm not sure who actually owns the property, and I've reached out to Ben Quick a couple of times and haven't got a response. I imagine he's talking to his individuals as well to see what type of ownership interest they actually have in the property. And so if we want to delay it to find out the answer to that question, we can. I'm happy to push harder and go knock on his door, see if I can catch him at the office, that sort of thing.
And I only say that just because we may find out that the North Ogden Canal Company doesn't want the trail there, and then this is a moot issue.
Could we also? There's other options for the trail.
Mm-hmm.
So, can we make a motion to approve the 750 and just say it needs a trail?
That's what the planning commission did.
Right, and so you guys, it's up to you guys to bring back the options of where you want the trail.
So that
I know it's not. I know.
So the planning commission had said, from the south end to the north end,
right?
And so
there's a stub street on the north as well that could connect into. I mean, there's more than one option to. So I don't want to say this is where it's going to go.
I'd actually just like to put it on the sidewalk to the east in the other subdivision.
If you can go and connect it, that'd be great. That's my point. It's up to you guys to figure it out. Yeah. We're not developers, and
we're actually going to suspend it over the houses, so
okay.
it's not.
That works. Yeah. So
we did that at the mall, and then they took it down. Remember that?
So are you gonna make a motion, Ryan?
Wintertime toboggan?
Well, yeah,
I do, but I still think that we need to, I still worry about the trail aspect of it.
well,
You
and
can
that's
vote no.
what, okay.
Can we approve the
Can I ask a clarifying
750
question?
feet?
Yep.
John, if the trail is required, we're requiring it of the landowner, correct?
Yes.
So whether or not the canal company owns the canal has nothing to do with it. If we require the trail, it has to go through somewhere on the landowner's property. Is that correct?
I would take the approach that the city would be in charge of making that final connection across the north end. Yes, if that's what you're asking, that we're talking about the landowner putting the easement, the trail in on his property, and then the city would be responsible for that
When
last.
you say the north section, use your clicker and point to me.
So that, I don't have a pointer, but the very last little pink leg up there between the two houses. Thank you.
That last little piece up there, so the city would be responsible for that portion, but the landowner would be responsible for the trail below that, and which is, regardless of whether or not the canal company wanted the trail, it would be on the landowner's property.
Right.
And that's where the head gates, that's where the head gates of those
That
Mud
little
Creek
piece
and North
between the
Ogden.
houses? Yeah, that would be the city's responsibility, not the landowner's.
I'm not saying it's the landowners. I'm saying it's the head gates are right there, and it connects onto Paul Mackley's property,
Right.
which I still think ought to be approved with North Ogden Canal Company.
What's your suggestion?
What's my suggestion?
Yeah. We table it?
Can we,
Get more information?
Can we vote and approve without knowing exactly what's going to happen with the trail? Because I really think North Ogden Canal Company, my insurance background tells me that there could be an issue there.
Well, North Ogden Canal, though, lets people along their roads all the time.
So does
All the way
Pineview.
along North Ogden, all the way out to Brigham City. There's never been an issue with people using that as a trail, ever. Open.
Dedicated, but those are dedicated.
Still, they don't care. They leave the gates open. They could lock them at any time if they cared.
How come you lock yours?
Pineview is the same way.
What's that?
Pineview is the same way.
Yeah. I'm uncomfortable granting the exception without knowing exactly what's happening, not necessarily the placement, but the requirement of the trail. It just leaves a door open, and I'm not willing to leave that door open.
Well, Phil and I seem to be, or Carl and I seem to be okay with that, Ben,
Okay with what?
about approving the special exception. But you want the trail.
Yeah.
Well,
My only condition is I just want to find out what the North Ogden Canal Company, but we can't assume what the North Ogden Canal Company's liability is going to say. So I guess we're tabling it.
I don't know, I don't want to table, I'm gonna make a motion if you're not.
go for it.
Yeah, I move that we approve the special exception for the 750-foot cul-de-sac and with the trail that connects from the north to the south. And the planning commission will approve, how that connection is.
I have a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. We'll begin any other discussion or questions? Then we'll begin the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilman Severie,
Nay.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes.
But I still think we need to still talk. I mean, even though that's passed, I still think we need to talk to the North Ogden Canal Company.
Absolutely.
Can you express an opinion on the pond, what John said? That would be helpful if you could.
So, John, as far as the pond goes, I'd like to see what the proposal is. I'm fine with it, but I don't even know what it is. You know what I mean?
And that's my thought too. This is the first I've heard of a pond being put there.
Correct. I mean, it's I've seen it on the plat now and stuff, but it's, until we kind of have an idea, I'm not against it. I just kind of need to know a little more particulars about it before I say, hey, yeah, I'll do that,
So that's really, I mean, if the council's open to it, then we'll bring it back.
I'm open to it.
Okay.
I'm one guy.
I think
I'm
we need to
open
get
it.
Public Works input on it. Do they want another tiny detention pond that
Yeah,
they have to maintain?
Well, and it'll be on top of sewer and water lines.
Yeah.
Or storm drain
And,
lines.
and they're probably deep enough, would be my guess. I think we will need to do a, because it was put on a plat as a road dedication, there might not need to be a surplus property hearing, but there would need to be an abandonment of a road hearing. Because it is shown on a plat as a road piece, and so there are some more hearings that would have to happen before we could finalize that. But if the council's okay with that approach, then we'd probably come back, have an official decision on whether or not you were open to the idea pending the outcome of the hearing. Technically, anyone who abuts property next to a piece of road like this could file a suit prohibiting it from being given, turned into something other than a road. But it's kind of a weird, there's some nuances in the law that I'll need to do some research on, because.
I'm not opposed to that.
Okay.
But I'm one guy, so you'll have to hear from anybody else.
Is there any issues on the annexation that needs to be discussed with regard to this, or?
Well, so if the fees aren't paid and it's not filed by the end of this month, my understanding is that the 30-day window from when the council approved it is lapsed, and it would have to go back and start again. So I think the applicant will probably get that taken care of, I would imagine, in this next week, so that we don't run into that deadline with the Lieutenant Governor's office.
If that deadline is missed, is there another set of fees that has to be paid?
We have to renotice everything again. I would say we wouldn't need to do the $800, which is kind of the zoning fee,
Yeah.
but there would be the new
The
notification
noticing
fees. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, council.
That gives you direction, right, John? You good?
We're all gonna drag out. Okay.
Only 8:20.
Okay.
Done.
It's getting warmed up.
Number 6, discussion or action to consider a resolution regarding Utah's housing needs. This will be presented by John Colley, our city administrator and attorney.
So, council, there was not a staff report for this item, and that was intentional. Let me pull up the resolution here. And just because I didn't want anyone, I mean, this is a completely legislative item, so I didn't feel like you needed anything more than the letter from the Salt Lake Chamber, it's an email saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and the resolution, which was written by the Salt Lake Chamber. Sorry. It's a pretty, I don't want to say, it's kind of a, I'm trying to think of the right word to describe it. This type of a resolution is not necessarily specific enough that it's clear what the intent is, meaning that anybody could take this resolution and say, North Ogden supports us because they signed this resolution and we're talking about housing availability, or North Ogden doesn't support us because they just increased their impact fees, and I guess staff doesn't have a firm position on this because it's a completely legislative item. Obviously, these 7 items here at the top are the most important things to consider, because that's really what are the goals that the resolution's there to go after. The one that might be the impact fees I mentioned and permit increases, typically those generally go up as time goes on, as facilities get more expensive, and so I just wouldn't want someone to come in 3 years and say, hey, how could you increase an impact fee? You signed this resolution. But it's up to the council what you'd like to do and what you're thinking. I know that's a fantastic explanation of the resolution, but
No, it's terrible.
The resolution or the?
No, his wording of it.
So,
Mayor?
Yes.
I don't like it. I understand the need for, the housing gap and all of that kind of stuff. I think about the Ogden area having 50% of the state's halfway housing prison release beds. because of resolutions like this where the rest of the state doesn't do their fair share. And there's no effort to spread the impact of that prison release halfway house bedding that's so prominent in the Ogden area and the issues that are often associated with that from a criminal relapse standpoint. As I read through this several times over the last week, to me it seemed like Salt Lake City is more than happy to form a resolution that helps us take care of their problem. And I think we're making good steps in our city without this kind of a resolution to address moderate income housing. Village at Prominence Point and other projects that may be coming down the road will address a wider spectrum of housing needs, housing prices, and those kinds of things. The vagueness of it, I mean, like you explained, John, it's vague enough to not really pin them down on anything, but enough that they could start trying to pin us down on something, and I don't like those kinds of things. So I'm not in favor of adopting this resolution. Happy to do all we can as a city to address the housing crisis and, from a pricing and availability and all that. I don't think we need to partner with Salt Lake City or the Salt Lake Chamber or those guys down there to do it.
Other discussion?
I would need to think harder on it. I'm not in favor of it right at the moment. I just need to think a little bit more about it. I'm not as strongly opposed to it as Phil might be, but then again, I haven't thought about it as hard probably. So I could be as strong as Phil about it, but
you're stronger than I am.
Yeah,
that's why I fear you.
I'm just not. I gotta think about it a little more. That's where I'm at. So I wouldn't want to approve it right now.
And this is, maybe I'm just too new at all of this, but how do you enforce affordable housing? If two houses, one costs less than the other, I'm gonna go for the cheaper one, even though I make more than a guy that can only afford the cheaper one. So I mean, how do you enforce it as a city? We're doing what we can to put in. I mean, we've got developments coming that have townhomes, apartments, whatever. But other than that, they can be $1 million apartments. Not that they're getting them. Well, I don't know. So.
Well, and I was in a conference today where a developer said specifically that exact thing, except a different way. What they said is, if there's not affordable housing, then when that person who was making $30,000 now makes $50,000, there's nowhere for them to move to then make that other house now available. So if they can't upgrade, then the cheaper housing is no longer available. And I think he was saying exactly what you were saying, though not exactly the same way. He was basically admitting to the fact that people will continue to live in cheaper housing, although his business is obviously based on getting people to upgrade. And so that's part of the issue, is because people don't move, or the only way they can move is by selling their house for so much more because there's a shortage, it just inflates the price over and over.
Well, we heard some at the League of Cities and Towns here this fall about this housing crisis. Almost all the presentations were about that, and some of the league's concerns are the rumblings from the state legislature of them wanting to pass ordinances that would force cities to do certain things, to build certain levels of housing and things like that, and take all the control away from the cities. And for me, this is a step in that direction. I think we know what's best for North Ogden.
Right. Well, and that's my thought, is if we force developers to build $1,000 homes, I'll sell mine and I'll move into one.
Yeah, I like your question though. I mean, how do you enforce it?
How do you force? So.
Other questions or concerns? Yes.
Well, wasn't it a little while ago when this first started came to us that they said if we didn't start making steps in this direction that they would?
That's more or less the homeless situation.
The homeless, but yeah, I agree. I think we're doing all that we can do to meet the needs and what we need, affordable housing. And yeah, I'm not in agreement with this resolution either.
Well, and I think that it's still being threatened at the state legislature. Threaten's the wrong word. It's still being talked about.
No, I think threaten's the right word.
The idea that there might be some state intervention on zoning around transportation projects. I mean, that's the way it's always been floated. The low-hanging fruit on those in that discussion is front runner and track stops. That's the first area that they're going to try and control, because then you're eliminating the car entirely. You know, people can go from their apartment to tracks to downtown Salt Lake.
So then we're free.
And
they eliminated that from us.
But then the next level of discussion will be the state-funded highways, which would be Washington Boulevard and 2700. You know, and they might look at connection points like where those two come together and say, okay, this is the next level of fruit that they're after. But that's, you know, I just think that when it comes down, assuming it happens, and when makes it sound like I know something I don't, because I'm guessing. But if it comes down, it will be based on those stations first, and then be expanded out to other areas if they're not seeing the results that they want to see. So if that puts us at a fairly low risk, just as part of the discussion. Sorry, probably, yeah.
Okay, Council, do you have a motion on this?
Can I ask just one more question?
Sure.
Gosh, I've been a ton of questions today. So, John, this is not necessarily really, it's not like we're passing any kind of ordinance. We're just saying, hey, we'd like to help the rest of the state in helping people to be into homes.
So this is like a general feel-good policy resolution, which means we're officially in support of this idea. Let me just highlight number 5.
It's not like there's going to be accountability, right?
Well, so yeah, it does tie some accountability, but this statement, think and coordinate regionally about local land use decisions, I don't know what that means. Does that mean Weber County says, hey, you passed this resolution, so we're going to now impose a regional land use body, and you can help, you can participate, but we're going to do it based on population, and oh wow, Ogden has the most people, so they get to help make land use decisions for you? Or does it mean the opposite, which is, well, we expect all the cities to get together and work it out amongst yourselves and present to us a plan? I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of wiggle room in the language, if that helps.
So if we're already doing these things, which I agree with, then shouldn't we just kind of play nice?
That's not a bad approach. I'm just, you know,
we're already doing it.
Here's my concern, Blake, and that is that groups like this who have a vested interest in pushing the legislature towards them taking greater control over what we can do here in the city will use a resolution like this to say, look at the communities that support us in the efforts that we're making. North Ogden supports us, Pleasant View supports us, Harrisville supports us. They're all behind you stepping in and taking control over so that we can force the issue of affordable housing. And to me, that creates a false impression. Playing nice is one thing. Doing all that we can is one thing. The potential of this being used as an endorsement of their final end game and what they would like the legislature to do and take away from the cities is the concern that the League of Cities and Towns has from our September conference, and it is the concern that I have. I'm all about doing everything we can for affordable housing. I'm leery of jumping in bed with a group that may have ulterior motives that are not in our best interest, and then using this as a way to say, look at who we have support from.
Is the Housing Gap Coalition, that's not a government body, right?
It's a group. It's private, public. It's the ULCT's on it, the Utah Association of Realtors. I mean, it's a group of people coming together, and it's been funded by the legislature for the next 5 years, I think.
Well, and one other thing I'm not a big fan of is this email. I think that Annette attached that was addressed to her that says, we are compiling a public list of which cities do and do not sign this resolution. Mm-hmm. Let us know so we can change your status when you pass it. I'm like, that just... I just don't.
She was the gal that was
yeah,
here.
she
just
was the
a-
one that was here. It just, I don't like it when people word stuff like that. We're threatening you in an indirect way.
Known as emotional blackmail.
I don't take, if I get threatened, I actually do the opposite. I'm like, well, let's see what happens. So.
Well, knowing the origin, I don't think it's necessarily a threat. But
I know, but I don't like the wording. It sounds like a threat.
If there's no other discussion, can we hear a motion?
I'll move that we not that we not sign the resolution regarding Utah's housing needs.
Okay, we've had a motion by Councilman Swanson. May I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Councilwoman Stoker. Begin the voting with Councilwoman Stoker.
No.
Councilman Swanson.
Okay, yes, okay,
You're voting yes for the motion of not signing.
that's right, yes.
It's yes to not sign it or no to not sign it.
Not sign it.
That means you say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Severy.
I'm going to be the lone wolf again now.
Okay. Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Made everyone jump.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to think about it, but right now. So
Next item on the agenda is discussion on educational assistance. The presenter will be John Call, City Administrator and Attorney.
So, council, we have in our personnel policy, there is a program for educational assistance, and specifically what we're talking about is this subsection C, which typically has been meant to mean college education. The city, as far as I know, has never funded that program. But we have had at least one employee who was interested in this program. And I think that with the focus on internally finding the next round of leaders for our city, I think this is the type of program that I would support as helping to establish that that those new leaders, to give them experience. Obviously, if we were participating in this program with someone, we would expect a certain amount of year commitment from them as well, or else a repayment. The way this one is set up is we cover up to 50% of what their cost for the education would be, with a cap of $4,000. Only
per year, though, right?
That's per year.
Per person or?
Okay. Yeah, but it would be limited on how much money the council made available. So if there was only $2,000 available and there were 2 applicants, technically, the way it's written is it would fall on me to decide how the money was divided up and shared. And so, anyways, I think this is a good type of program. There's a reason it was included in our personnel policy. It does cost money, though, and we don't have any money in it for the budget this year. So the question is, do you want us to prepare something and bring it back for the budget amendment in November 28th? And if so, how much would you like to do?
I'd like you to bring something back, but I mean, how many people were interested in it?
So far, there's been 2 that I've been aware of since I've been working with the city. One, there wasn't any money, and they were asking for it on the back end, after they'd finished their semester. And our rule specifically says it needs to be pre-approved. And so this would, so there's technically just one. The semester actually would start before the November 28th. And so I would probably, if the council's amenable, kind of give them a contingent offer saying, yes, we approve this educational expense, because they're going to do it probably regardless. But getting money from the city is contingent on them funding the program, so that so they understand there's no guarantee it's coming if the council says they don't want to do it.
So John, I perused this, but I got it. I didn't read it word for word. Is it on the reimbursement? Is it based on grades at all?
It currently is not.
So the company I work for, you get a B or above they reimburse you 100%, but it has to be pre-approved. A C, it's like 70%, and anything less than that, they don't give you anything. So, but then this, as a student, you'd have to pay your own books and stuff. But this is just the. So I think it's a great program. I'm not opposed to the way it's written, but I wouldn't be opposed to being an incentive of grades either. You know.
Well, and I think there's some leeway in the policy that says the only thing they have to do is successfully complete the course, which in our case, or in most colleges, that means a C or above, or a C minus or above. And so that doesn't mean that as part of the approval, it couldn't be written in, hey, if you get B's and above, you'll get the 50. If you get if you get below a B but still passing, you get 25% or something. I mean that would be entirely appropriate, but I haven't even looked into doing that.
In the two organizations I've worked for, this has been part of their program, and it's developed some great leadership within the company. So I think it's a great thing to do.
Well, and I actually don't have a problem with C's the full 50% because they're full-time employees. So
C's get degrees.
Well, yeah, but they're still working full-time for the city, so they're still putting in a 40-hour week and doing this on their days off.
Well,
or
C
nights,
means you're an
whatever.
average, right?
Right.
So is this
they're not full-time students, so let's help them out.
Would this be just college, or is this like for let's say they do trade schools, or they go to let's say the police academy or something like that? I mean, is that?
So what it says is general training and education, which may indirectly benefit North Ogden City, and so it would be any sort of a certificate training, anything that would qualify. Obviously, the stuff that is job specific is covered in number 1 and number 2. Mm-hmm. That's always covered by the city.
Well, that's like the continuing education they have to have for the sewer guys or the SWIP guys or something.
Or even like we talked about possibly putting people through posts. That would be covered in section 1 and 2. Same thing, we could require a commitment for it. But 3 is more, someone wants to go get an MBA, and in reality, they probably won't stay at the city forever, but we will get some use out of it while they're doing their schooling, as well as the couple of years after they're committed to the city, we'd get those intangible benefits.
So I guess, John, for me, I think it's a great program. $4,000 per year, but that would be per. I mean, so I'd almost kind of. I as far as approving it, I'm fine with the 4,000, but I don't know if we need to target more, or do we need to look at more? I mean, I just
to put 8 or 12 in there. I mean, we've had
I don't see
two that you've thought of, and maybe when word gets around that we're funding this, and we've got 12,000 available, maybe we'll have some other individuals take advantage of it.
Right, and I'm like I said, so I'm not sure what number we target for sure.
That's my thought.
I mean, the nice thing about it is, so we've got one semester coming with one applicant. If you funded 4,000, then that would either carry that applicant through the whole year, or if we had another person jump in who's doing school, then you can cover 2 applicants, for a semester, and then we could talk about it again in January or December or the next budget hearing to say, this is what we've done. These are the type of programs that people are requesting. Do you want to fund it for another semester?
Is this a fund that, let's say we put in money and then we only have one person take advantage of it, and then they graduate, and is it a fund that we could keep feeding, so in case future?
We'd need to approve it every year.
Okay.
So it would be part of the budget line item approvals. It's because it's general fund money, it's hard to roll it over because it just commingles with all the other general fund. And so we'd need to reallocate every year. But it'd be easy to say, last year we spent $2,500, we think we'll spend the same this next year. So, and I don't think it would be I think if we were spending more than $10,000 a year, it would probably be, we'd really need to look at which programs we're paying for, to just, not saying that we're just going to willy-nilly approve programs, but, if we're having 6 people apply, then we might need to carefully look at it a little closer. Or
maybe
maybe
any employees that want to go to a real law school?
There's only one in the state. Well, I guess there's 2, sorry.
I don't know.
I forgot about the blue one.
Would pot throwing count?
Pot throwing?
Yeah.
Which type of pot are you talking about?
You know how you throw pottery. You
Oh,
throw
yeah,
it
yeah.
on the wheel. That'd
If
be a
it-
fun class,
He is an
right?
attorney. He's
If
pot.
it was part of a general studies program for a,
Not Proposition 2 pot throwing.
okay, that's confused.
So, John, do you need us to give you a number, or is that you kind of have an idea?
So I think I have an idea. What I'll probably ask Evan to do is bring back with the budget hearing a recommendation for 4,000 for the full year. If we have more applicants, then we can talk about increasing that. But that would at least, if an extra person shows up and we felt like the program was good, then we could at least fund 2 people for this semester.
So maybe just for clarity then, John, because when I look at 3B, the total assistance granted to any employee should not exceed 4,000. When if all of a sudden we had 10 people who wanted to take advantage of it, and we're talking 40 grand.
Well, that's why I think we would want to bring it back and say, okay, we need more direction from the council on the type of programs we're doing, because we probably wouldn't want to, if someone was getting an engineering degree and they wanted to be a mechanical engineer, the city doesn't have a big benefit from it, so they might not get as much funding as someone who was getting a business degree, where they wanted to be an HR manager or something like that.
Well, and that's how.
Well, and we can set a cap.
Well, that's how Big D works too. Is we have to have it approved with what our and it has to be work related, and we could stipulate that if that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about it.
Okay.
I just worry a little bit about, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if we put, I don't know, can you come back with some propositions about how much you'd want to put into the budget for it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I'd just start with 4,000 for now, and that would carry us through the year for one person, or if we had a second applicant.
Through this
then,
fiscal year.
Yeah. And then if we approach it that way, then if something changes.
I'm all about this. I mean, I did my graduate work with assistance from my previous employer, but in my mind, I'm going, well, what do the citizens say if all of a sudden we're saying, yeah, we're supplementing people's.
And that's why I think.
And they're trying to pay for their own kids'
yeah, when you're going,
education.
We might even get some comments. I know there's still some public here, so the idea is it'll come back in the full budget hearing, so people will have the chance to comment on it then, and then also just that's why I think if you're spending more than 10,000 a year, maybe that's the most you want to budget. But that's where the council gets to kind of make that policy decision.
Because as an HR package, I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah,
I think it's wonderful.
Okay. We will bring something back.
Okay. Meeting is now open for public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on to council, mayor, and staff comments. Councilman Turner?
I have nothing right at the moment until I think of something later.
Okay. Councilman Severie?
Yeah, I had just a couple of things really quick. And the last couple of weeks I didn't make it this last week, but the week before, the Garbage Pail Kids, I think maybe only Phil and I are probably familiar with them. Are you familiar with them too, John?
Yep.
When I first met with him the first night up on the pass to help him clean up the trails, I told them, now you can correct me, and I just said that we might be able to allocate some money because the money that it's coming out of their own pockets to buy garbage bags, and I told them we might be able to spring for some garbage bags as we're working in the North Ogden area. Come out of maybe Parks and Recs. If not, I'll just buy them.
I think we could probably come up with some garbage bags. I think the initial indication is permanent, like cans, seem to go over the edge.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And then the big dumpsters, if they're unlocked, then they just collect. Tiffany can tell you, couches, mattresses, and so. But garbage bags is something I think we could easily provide through Public Works or
In my
Parks.
comments, I've got something
Yeah.
tied right along with that.
Yeah, okay, because Jed, I'd like to go back to Jed Malmberg and say Jed would be happy.
I work with Jed.
Oh, you work with Jed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then you should be able to.
Very well.
Well, he grew up around the house. His family grew up around for me, so
okay.
I know the Malmbergs. I had a citizen approach me about this last Saturday. Was it this last Saturday? This Saturday before? Have we changed the punch system at the green pit where you have to get a punch every time you go through?
They got changed it.
Yeah.
Why is it last year?
Why?
People were taking advantage of it.
There were people bringing dump trucks in, super and on one punch for the whole day, and so
A dump truck.
Multiple trucks.
Trailers, trucks, and
I think the discussion was there was only $3 per punch, and so that's half the price of what it costs to take it to the county, and it's closer, so it was just charge everyone every time they enter and leave.
Trent, or I think Trent told me that it was always in the policy procedures, one punch per trip, but it kind of they started just allowing multiple trips per day. So
that was the council decision.
Okay.
It was probably last fall at the end, about this time last year.
Yeah.
Okay, understandable. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilman Barker?
yeah, I just have one thing. I don't know if Councilman Swanson was going to mention it. Do we have a code of conduct for our parks? Like that's posted at all parks. This is how we're supposed to act. 'Cause I've heard bad things about the skate park lately, about language and.
So I don't think we have that actually posted anywhere. I'm looking for Tiffany to.
No.
And in the past, we have tried to, not when I've been here, but before then, to prohibit profanity in parks and things. And it strikes up against free speech issues. And so it ends up being an issue.
The trash, however, we can. There's no right to littering.
Is that what you're hearing? It's just language? Or is it
Well,
behavior?
So I'm a big frequent person at the skate park. I don't know if you could tell. But no, a lot of people, I've heard from other people that they're not happy with the language, and we have the park right next to it that they go take kids to, and they don't want their kids to hear it. But, I guess we'll.
You should put a sign up, and whether they do it or not, something else. But
I mean, we can put a sign up that encourages it, the appropriate behavior.
Right.
We just wouldn't be able to arrest anybody or.
Well, yeah. But the littering, we can't, we can work on that.
Yeah. And there was that phone call was made.
I know we do supply garbage cans. It's just, it is hard to put this stuff from your hand into a garbage can.
Well, and when I've been over there, I know.
See, it won't go in.
It's easier just to drop.
We have kind of a standard. I mean, I know when most of the time when the parks folks go through, they're picking up trash. I've picked up trash when I've gone over there to look at stuff. It's, and I imagine that park is already clean because the phone call was made this morning to the Parks Department, and I'm sure it's already been picked up before the end of the day. So.
Same with the roads.
what amazes me is when I travel through Kansas and Nebraska and some of those places, the roads are manicured, not an ounce of trash. Just drive down our roads and.
That's because they have 70-mile-an-hour winds that keep blowing it down the road. That's why they don't have any air pollution either.
We have the 70-mile-an-hour winds too, and that still doesn't help.
And I'm not saying it's one of our city's issues. It's a bigger issue.
Yeah. Okay, Councilman Swanson.
Regarding the trailhead up there, I contacted Republic Services to find out what one of the big steel 3-yard, virtually immovable cans picked up twice a month would cost us, and it's $49.25.
Up there on that first turn?
A month. Yep,
First
up
turn.
there at the trailhead.
I was wondering the same
I
thing.
talked to Dave Espinoza. He said that with council's approval, they've got $50 a month that can come out of Public Works without a problem, and we can get that can placed up there. I talked to Brenda Upright. They do have the 3-yard cans that have the small lid that you put stuff in through, and when the truck comes in to load it, it actually unlocks the big lid so that it dumps it, so that mattresses and things like that. I mean, it's basically a regular trash can receptacle size in the big lid, and it's $50 a month. So I would propose that we give Dave the go-ahead and we contact, and they'll have a bin up there within a week.
I was thinking the same thing, but I thought the same thing as John.
Well, the 3-yard steel ones are pretty heavy. I don't, yeah.
I could see some guy going, we're gonna get rid of this and back his truck up and just push it over.
I think
But we could give it a try.
it's worth a try.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try.
Worst case, we're out $50 for a few months.
The other thing that we will see, and if you're okay with this as well, people will put the couch and the mattress to the side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So if you understand there might be some expense for that as well as time, you know.
I think we do what we can and see how it works.
Okay.
That's what I would propose if
I was
council.
worried that the bathrooms down on the 2750 was gonna end up getting tipped over, and I don't think it's
They
happened.
haven't even been spray painted. So, and then the other thing that I was going to bring up, Ryan already brought up about the skate park. Tiffany, I told several residents that I'd get together with you and with Dave, and we'd powwow about what we can do to parent other people's children.
Yeah,
And, you know, without violating First Amendment rights and those kinds of things, how we can, you know, if there's a way that we can try to approve things there. So
I'd talk to the chief and maybe they can spend
Yeah.
a little more time walking through there or something too.
yeah, I think there's several things that we can do.
With a smile and a gun? Okay.
Can I jump in real quick too, as long as we're talking police?
Yeah.
I just remembered something. Kudos to the police because one of the Thane Schaefer was telling me this last week that one of the policemen stopped, walked over, helped him out with some things, started talking about his car in his garage. He has an old 48 Chevy pickup or something like that.
It's his grandpa's pickup.
Yeah, and Thane says, I enjoyed that conversation with that policeman. It was awesome. So I don't know if that was part of Chief Quinney's public relations drive, or that. I know there's one citizen in North Ogden who thinks the police in North Ogden are pretty incredible. So
I took a picture and posted a couple of our officers helping a gentleman get into his car.
I thought that was your car.
No, it wasn't mine. No.
wasn't you needing help?
What's that?
Wasn't you needing help?
Wasn't me needing help. It was just somebody else. They were just very dutifully helping
I
him
saw
get
that. That
inside
was
his
cool.
car. I just thought, walked over and asked if I could take their picture, and the guy whose car it was didn't want to be in the picture, but the officers were like, whatever, you know, we're just trying to get this thing unlocked. It was great to see him, you know, a couple of them. One of them was our brand new officer. I forget his name.
Armstrong.
Armstrong, yes, Officer Armstrong was with his TFO.
So if Chief
FTO,
Quinney
I
is
should
doing
say.
that, encouraging that, tell him it's awesome.
Yep, I will make sure that he hears that.
It's awesome.
Yes.
Okay, Councilwoman Stoker?
Well, since I didn't get to be in on the debate of the cul-de-sac, I'm going to be the
Horse is dead.
the advocate, the dissenter on all the other comments tonight. I don't know that I agree with the dumpster up on top of the pass. First of all, I think it'll be ugly. It'll be an eyesore, and where are you going to put it? And I like the idea of a garbage sack's better because I do think mattresses and couches and everything else will be tried to put up there. And I like the idea of maybe talking to the police, the chief first, rather than trying to parent other parents' kids. I don't really agree with that either because it's not our job as a city to police other people's children. It's their job. Yeah. And these kids should know how to act.
It was tongue in cheek.
Should.
Well, I uncheeked it. And so those things I don't agree with, but I do want to say my thoughts have been with our police officers today with that accident, and I think we have a great police force, and just that my thoughts have been with them today over this tragic accident. And that's all I have to say.
Hey, just one more thing. I'm sorry, but situations like this where we had those 2 deaths, does the city send maybe flowers, or do we have anything like that where we could?
We sent cards.
Cards?
Yeah, for all deaths that we know of in the city, tragic, you know, unexpected or not, it's been a tradition that the mayor has a card that he signs and it gets sent out.
I write quite a few of them.
And also our Parks and Rec, one of our employees, his father passed away today, Ken Young.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Or he didn't, well, it was probably the other day, but it was in the paper today.
Okay, I have nothing. John?
The trailer, the police have made a contact.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's anyone living in it, although the trailer is still there.
The truck backed up to it today.
Yeah, well, they're following up on it and have been told it will be taken care of. So, just so you know, it is being taken care of or worked on. The video embedding, we've been talking with the folks who provide us the system, and there likely will be another piece of software we need to buy. I mentioned to them that if I would rather have one piece of software that does everything, even if that means we have to go back to scratch, because I don't know if you noticed, but when this thing goes down, it takes me, because I'm not a computer guy, but 45 minutes or an hour to figure out what's wrong and get it going again. And if I have to deal with 2 pieces of software or 3, then it'll be harder.
Cheryl loves the camera, so we need
to whatever we can do to zoom it in and make it easy.
And then
Zoom it in that side.
We did mention to the Planning Commission that we will be doing video with them as well. I think it's a good idea with them to wait either till January 1st to kind of start it with the new year so people aren't expecting it, or till we get that software, which I want to try and get January 1st. So there again, we have a nice cut. It's clean. Everything from this date forward is going to have the video or the screen embedded. So, and then one last thing, I didn't say it earlier, and I just want to make sure that you all know, I do not believe there has been any intentional delay on the part of our staff on any applications that have been brought to the city. That legally the city had no right to issue a building permit until July 17th. When the annexation was filed for, and it was approved and given back to the applicant within 2 months or within 2 weeks, and then they waited 2 months to put in their foundation. So there's been several accusations thrown at some staff members of ulterior motives and stuff, and they're genuinely trying to follow the rules, and I didn't want to say it when the applicant was here, because I didn't want it's not about that conversation. There's no chastisement there. I just want you all to know I firmly believe in our parks and our planning are doing what they think is best for the city and following the rules. They're not pushing the boundary of the rules to do what needs to be done. They're being good stewards with the code. So just so you know, in a lot of ways it'll be nice to move past this application and we can focus on other things. So, thank you.
Thank you. Lynn, thanks for being with us this evening. We appreciate your attendance here and substituting for Annette. Do you have anything you'd like to stand up and talk about, or cheerlead, or anything else? Nope. Okay. Tiffany, would you like to say the closing prayer?
Well, since I'm here, I just wanted to address the issue up on the trail with the dumpsters. Just by way of information, we used to have dumpsters in all of our parks, the smaller ones. And we found that people were dumping their refuse in them. They were filling them to a point where we weren't able to utilize them. So we got locks on them, and then the refuse would scatter all around the dumpsters that were there. So we've removed dumpsters from all of our parks, and we've actually removed trash cans, period, from Bicentennial Park, and it's one of our cleanest parks. We have signs there that it's a trash in, trash out park. And so I just wanted to let you know the history we've gone through on those.
I'll have to keep an eye on it then. Thank you.
Good input. Thank you. Brandon?
I guess I'd just add one other detail to what John stated regarding the concern that the applicant on the special exception expressed regarding delay on the building permit in particular. We waited several weeks for one piece of information that was a standard requirement from him, and there was and we approved the building permit within a matter of days after receiving that, but it took several weeks to get it is something that we require of all applicants. It was actually a plot plan. There was a piece of information that was missing on that, and it's standard for us to require that information. So I don't know the exact amount of days, but my guess is it was just a couple of days, literally after we got the required information that we approved the permit.
Thanks for that clarification. Council, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Don't drink that now. You won't.
Thanks, Lynn.
I probably still will. But I'm not getting it.